Very early every morning, when other shop owners are still sleeping, Mr. Zhao and his family start the busy job of making pastries. Since he left elementary school, Mr. Zhao has been working in the traditional pastry business, and to date has more than 40 years of work experience. During almost 400 years of historical development, traditional pastry can be said to be the epitome of Taiwanese local culture. These pastries stem from everyday life and seem to stand as a symbol of contemporary folk culture. The art of pastry making in Taiwan mostly dates back to immigrants from Fujian and Guangdong during the Qing dynasty. Tradition has it that pastries were invented by Zhuge Liang in the Three Kingdoms period. That's why pastry makers look upon Zhuge Liang as their founding father and regard his birthday on the 23rd day of the 7th lunar month as Pastry Festival. In Taiwanese folk tradition, every year throughout one's life, there are special pastries bearing witness to the rites of passage of life.
Because the custom of eating pastries has been passed down from our ancestors, at every important juncture of our lives, or at certain important times, we will pray or celebrate with pastries. When a newborn baby reaches 1 month old, he is wished a long life with red turtle cakes. At 4 months, special pastries are also required when it's time to stop babies drooling. When babies grow up and reach 4 months old, it is a special juncture to celebrate in the hope that they will grow up safe and sound. The most important cakes in a person's life are wedding cakes. Actually, there have been big changes from what they were like in the past. They started as large cakes weighing more than 2 kilos, then became divided into 2 couple cakes, then later became boxes of 6 cakes, and are now gift boxes with a mixture of both Chinese cakes and Western-style cookies. The demand for wedding cakes and cookies in Taiwan hasn't changed over the years, and that goes to show how important they are in a person's life.
Another rite of passage is the coming-of-age ceremony for 16-year-olds, held in the Tainan area in the 7th lunar month. This ceremony also has its own traditional pastries, which are especially attractive amid the dazzling array of sacrificial offerings. Another traditional Taiwanese custom is that every family will prepare New Year cake on New Year's Eve and steamed sponge cake at Spring Festival, hoping for promotion, wealth, and good fortune in the new year.
The most important festival of all for eating pastries has to be Mid-Autumn Festival, when everyone eats mooncakes. Following Mid-Autumn Festival come the birthdays of various gods and other occasions that require celebrating. Pastries are used as offerings in religious ceremonies because everyone can share the pastries after the ceremony as a way of ensuring peace and safety. These things have always been a part of Taiwanese existence and are inextricably linked to our lives.
Fong Pian rice cakes play an important role in traditional Taiwanese ceremonies. They are made by steaming glutinous rice flour, commonly referred to as Fong Pian flour, then adding syrup and a small amount of banana essence. The mixture is kneaded several times, and when even, it is pressed into a mold or kneaded into the required shape. The cakes can be eaten straight away and do not require reheating. Fried jujube is a unique local pastry in Penghu that often appears during various celebrations and ceremonies. Fried jujubes are probably as significant to celebrations as red turtle cakes. Yet red turtle cakes seem more formal, and fried jujubes are perhaps a little more casual. They are unique to Penghu, and their shape is similar to that of sesame balls. The final step in building a house is to seal the ridge of the roof. At this time, the builder is invited onto the roof to throw fried jujubes and share good fortune. Fried jujubes can be kept longer than red turtle cakes because they've been deep fried. And another thing is that in the olden days, people didn't eat more than a spoonful of oil a month. So deep fried foods were especially attractive to them. Taiwan's pastry can be divided into two kinds: those made from rice and those made from flour.
Taiwan is in the south, and our main crop is rice, so the snacks our ancestors used to eat were mostly made from rice. Various kinds of pastries were also made from rice. It wasn't until our lives became more prosperous that we started importing flour, and a large number of pastries began to be made from flour.
The ancient technique of making black rice cakes is still preserved in the Tainan area, although it is fast becoming a dying art. As there wasn't much to eat in the olden days, foods made from rice were often seen as the most respectful for offering to the gods. Black rice cakes are so called because wooden blocks were used to cover and preserve the cakes. In the past, people used salt and sugar to preserve food. Salty and sweet things wouldn't usually go bad. There didn't used to be any refrigeration to preserve food, so things were often sweetened. Perhaps it was that in the past, there wasn't much to eat, so eating something like this was considered a treat. When making black rice cakes, we need to pack the rice cake into a hexagonal mold. After a period of heat and pressure, the cakes become chewier in texture. Turtle-shaped glutinous rice cakes need to be slowly kneaded into shape. They are pulled and twisted again and again before being formed into the shape of a turtle. So in terms of texture, turtle-shaped glutinous rice cakes are not as chewy or delicious as black rice cakes. You used to hear the older people saying that lots of black rice cakes were made in Anping, especially at times of worship and things like that. Anping is close to the sea, and lots of people used to take black rice cakes out to sea with them, as they could last for many days.
The habit of eating pastries came to Taiwan when immigrants from Fujian and Guangdong brought them from their hometowns. This habit has evolved over 3 or 4 centuries, which has something to do with using local ingredients and economic prosperity, and has resulted in large changes.
Shiluo mainly produces rice and vegetables. During the Japanese occupation, Shiluo was just like a granary, a very important place for the production of rice. Water flowing down from the Zhuoshui River was convenient for irrigation, so the number of rice products slowly increased, and therefore, we processed part of the rice to make mochi.
Lugang was a flourishing commercial port in the olden days. A commercial port meant an increase in wealthy people, and the oldest bakery there is Yuzhenjai.
Our store was founded in 1877. The original plan was not to open a bakery, as our ancestors were scholars. In those days, the scholars were also rich, often gathering together to recite poetry and compete with each other. At the time, my ancestors liked to make pastries for everyone to enjoy. Some of the scholars even kicked up a fuss, saying that they couldn't recite any poetry because they hadn't eaten any of the pastries. So among all this fuss, a pastry store with the same name, Yuzhenjai, was opened in the scholars' meeting place. Even when Yuzhenjai was still a scholars' meeting place, its most famous pastry, called Phoenix Eye Cake, started to be made. Phoenix Eye cakes are extremely delicate. The term Phoenix Eye was actually used to describe an extremely pretty girl. So the artistically creative poets used the same term for the Phoenix Eye cakes. Phoenix Eye cakes are really extremely delicate and were popular among the scholars. At the time, when many gentlemen of letters gathered together, their favorite thing to eat was the Phoenix Eye cakes, as they were soft and crumbly. Only the delicate hands of intellectuals were worthy of picking them up and eating them. So at the time, intellectuals became proud of eating Phoenix Eye cakes.
Making a phoenix cake is very complicated and time-consuming work. In the past, the sugar had to be stored in a cellar for up to 6 months, so that it turned into sugar strands before it could be mixed with the rice flour. Even today's cakes are made in a very fastidious way in Lugang. They are more refined in taste, just as if the literati from the olden days would be tasting them.
A century or so ago, pastries were more of a luxury item to Taiwanese consumers. Therefore, traditional pastries were only used for making offerings during ceremonies or at weddings. The pastries we have now were actually the so-called sacrificial offerings from a long time ago. It's just that they have been preserved until now. Of course, I think that there have been some changes in terms of flavor, texture, and the way they are made, but despite the development of Taiwan, you can still see these traditional pastries even today. With the changing times and the import of flour, the variety of pastries in Taiwan increased. There has also been a constant striving for change. From the simple flavor of the agricultural society through the more complex flavors of the industrial age to the healthy ideas of low sugar and low fat of the present day. This goes to show that there has been innovation and breakthrough in the traditional art of Taiwanese pastries. Pastries made from flour can be divided into 3 kinds, according to how they are made: shortcrust pastry, puff pastry, and filtered pastry. These 3 kinds of pastry count for almost all the Chinese-style pastries currently seen on the market. Shortcrust pastry is also called butter pastry. When it is being rolled out, each layer of pastry is interspersed with a layer of butter, which is folded and rolled together before the filling is wrapped inside. After baking, the rich layers of the pastry are revealed. The most commonly seen short-crust pastry on the market are mung bean pastries, sun cakes, and egg yolk pastries. The second most common is puff pastry, which is a kind of cake mix pastry. Granulated sugar and fat are fully beaten together before adding a little egg. And finally, the flour is added to make pastry. Once a filling has been added, the pastry is baked according to the double-sided frying technique. Pineapple cakes, which are so popular among the Taiwanese, are a kind of puff pastry. The third kind is filtered pastry, Qin-a pastry, or Hesheng pastry, which is made by forming syrup, fat, and flour into a dough. Once a filling has been added, the pastry is shaped by being pressed in a mold and then brushed with egg yolk. Most wedding cakes and moon cakes are representative of this kind of pastry. Due to the difference in geographical environment and culture between North and South Taiwan, traditional pastries are also unique to local areas. It is for this reason that local pastries have become popular gifts.
Because both worshippers and merchants would come to Beigang, the place grew pretty early on. Why are there so many zhuangyuan cakes available today? The pattern of zhuangyuan cakes was originally used for moon cakes at Mid-Autumn Festival. Yet nowadays, zhuangyuan cakes are used as a symbol of wishing good fortune at all the happy occasions in life, such as getting married and doing well on examinations. So they used the name and mold for zhuangyuan cakes to develop a zhuangyuan cake unique to Beigang. There are many worshippers and also tourists in Beigang who come here looking for gifts to buy. This has, of course, contributed to the considerably large number of bakeries in the area, as everybody wants to take some cakes home with them. If we look at the pastries in Tainan, we can see they still bear resemblance to original pastries. Just because the city has undergone development doesn't mean the pastries have changed too much in style. So the pastries we see today are extremely simple and not fancy at all. What you get is a mixture of flour and sugar, because this is how the people in Tainan used to eat pastries. And that tradition has been handed down to the present day. Their pastries are very plain.
Over the course of time, Western-style cakes have gradually replaced traditional pastries in the stores. However, there are still a large number of loyal customers buying traditional pastries. So those traditional bakeries still in existence enjoy a considerable share of the market.
Wedding cakes are another thing from Tainan. Everyone knows that the people in Tainan used to eat the big cakes, so wedding cakes have really developed in Tainan, where careful consideration and particular attention is paid to their flavor and form.
So, as people say, when Western-style cakes started to become popular, I think it had a great impact on the industry. Because these days, the market for traditional pastries has grown smaller. The problem is that many shops have closed down. I think a greater impact comes from another factor. Bakers, including ourselves, mainly make the traditional larger wedding cakes. Yet nowadays, fewer and fewer people are getting married and having children, which means fewer people are buying pastries and cookies. I think that's had a greater impact on our business. Actually, our target customers are mostly in the range of 25 to 35 years old. Chinese-style pastries and cookies used to be fatty, sweet, and salty. Because there wasn't an effective way of preserving them, they had to be fatty, sweet, and salty. But nowadays, people are trying to eat more healthily, so we need to use low fat, low sugar, and low salt. We also don't add any preservatives and try to use natural ingredients. We have to do this as our customers' eating habits have changed, so you have to follow the trend and meet the customers' needs. Penghu, was one of the first places in Taiwan to be developed. Currently, the oldest traditional bakery in Taiwan is in Penghu. We started out making celebration pastries, cookies, and other dried products, just about everything. Salted cookies were invented by one of my earliest ancestors. At the time, all pastries and cookies were sweet, so he invented a special salty cookie. Penghu is quite a cold place. Salted cookies are spicy, sweet, and salty. They are crispy, yet soft, and perfect in color and flavor. They are unique cookies with multiple flavors fused onto one small cookie. In addition to salted cookies, brown sugar cake is another popular gift in Penghu. Brown sugar cakes date from the Japanese occupation, when a merchant from Ryukyu came to Penghu and opened a shop mainly selling Ryukyuan brown sugar. He made some cookies from brown sugar simply by mixing brown sugar and flour together to make a Ryukyuan-style cookie and started selling them. At the time, he employed a local man from Magong called Chun Ke-chang. He was hardworking and well-liked by his boss, so he was slowly shown how to make the cookies. When the Japanese surrendered, he kept making the Ryukyuan snacks, but improved them to suit the taste of the Penghu people, to create a flavor the people preferred and could accept. This became the so-called brown sugar cake. He later passed the recipe on to his sons. The Chuanren and Yuanli Xuan bakeries were owned by his sons, and now their sons after them. To be honest, brown sugar cakes are a simple mixture of brown sugar, bread flour, cake flour, and some water. The ingredients are ground together in a grinder, but you have to be exact about how much water you add. You need to bear the temperature in mind when you do this, which is quite hard to gauge, so sometimes after the cake is steamed, it doesn't taste quite right, which is strange as the same recipe has been used. We later discovered that it is a question of temperature. When my father, Chun Ke-chan, made the pastries, they would taste of medicine. But now we've gradually improved the technique. There have also been advances in chemical industry. They no longer taste of medicine, only of brown sugar. On the Taiwanese mainland, green bean pastry, also known as mung bean pastry, are very common pastry. Each area of Taiwan has its unique way of making mung bean pastry, so both the external shape and the ingredients used in the filling are quite different. The name mung bean pastry originated in Fongyuan, Taichung. This shop was founded by my grandfather in 1900. How did the so-called mung bean pastry come about? The ovens in those days weren't as easy to use as the electric ovens we have today, so when you baked cookies, you had to keep turning them over again and again to stop them from burning. Because he almost burned the cookies one time, my grandfather had the idea of baking the cookies on one side only. By avoiding burning the cookies, the finished result became quite different. After several attempts, he was finally successful, resulting in a risen, white, round, cute-looking cake. Lots of customers came and asked what kind of cake it was, and an old lady who was minding the store said that as it was a round, risen pastry filled with mung bean paste, that they could call it mung bean pastry. The layers in the cake are very distinct, and under hot temperatures, the whole thing rises and splits open. It is pretty and white. The shop was called Snowflake, so a beautiful artistic coincidence led to the signature snowflake pastry being born. In Miaoli, mung bean pastry are known by a different name, belly button pastry.
Okay, take them to be steamed for an hour.
The Miaoli County government has now made the belly button pastry the county pastry, and it has become a local souvenir. Its shape and the way it is prepared is different from traditional mung bean pastry, and it has its own unique style.
It's unique to Miaoli, and we call other specialties of Miaoli, like Juqian cookies, cake pastry cookies. You can only find them in Hsinchu, Junan, and in the Hakka villages. It is quite difficult to find these traditional things nowadays. We are perhaps the only bakery in Miaoli to make them. The older generation has pretty much all passed away. In the past, when midwives helped give birth, they would tie the umbilical cord before cutting it. They wouldn't cut it too deeply, so that it would protrude slightly when the child grew up. And so the name belly button pastry was invented for this risen pastry. They used to be called mung bean pastry, as they rose in the same way. The two things had the same name, so they had to think of a name to replace mung bean pastry. And as they rose and looked like belly buttons, they were given the name belly button pastry.
As well as using a filling of mung beans and meat, jack beans were ground into white bean paste and became a commonly used ingredient in pastries, with different bakeries using different names. My dad noticed that everyone was eating mung bean pastry, but the pastries were quite large and most children and adults could only eat half, leaving the other half for the next day. My dad thought that this was very unhygienic. Why? Because there were no fridges in those days, and he was afraid the half-eaten pastries would attract flies. So he thought, why not try to make a smaller size? Later, these small moon cakes were promoted and became extremely successful. Our so-called traditional pastry, by which I mean Mid-Autumn Festival mooncakes and other small cakes, used to be made with lard, as it had a better flavor. That was quite a traditional characteristic of Taiwanese puff pastry cakes. Yet, when you ate them, crumbs seemed to drop everywhere. That happened with the Taiwanese products, but not with the Japanese. The bean paste was thicker and easier to eat without crumbs dropping everywhere. The two cultures were not the same, so the cakes had their differences too. Apart from being particular about the flavor, Taiwan's traditional pastries represent another art of eating. That is, the shape and pattern of the pastry mold. These molds not only represented the intricate beauty of handicraft, but also reflected the splendid culture of ordinary life.
The pastry molds used to be made mainly of wood, such as the most commonly used Formosan Macalia, which was the hardest. Deep grooves could be carved into the wood. In the 1930s, metal molds such as tin aluminum alloy, called sina in Taiwanese, started to be used. These metal molds were used until recently, when high-pressure silicone molds, which are capable of pressing out cakes continuously, were introduced.
The patterns carved onto the molds were mainly representative of good fortune, with the turtle symbolizing long life. The most common was the red turtle cake, the figure of which could often be seen at times of worship. Pomegranates represented having many offspring, and calabashes represented good luck. Dragon and phoenix pastries were used at engagements and weddings, with the dragon and phoenix pattern representing a good match and good luck. The patterns on pastries weren't only used in the rites of passage of life, but also in praying for fame and success. The scholar, in an official hat, riding a horse returning home in glory, waited on by a servant, represented success in the imperial examinations.
There were two craftsmen at work on these molds. The master carver expressing his artistic skill in representing an intention on the mold, and then the baker using a certain pattern on his product, hoping that customers would understand what they meant.
There are many bakeries with more than a century of history in Taiwan. They all play an important role in and bear a deep influence on the history of pastry in Taiwan. These old stores have constantly improved their quality and striven to create a brand image during the changing times. They have also adopted new ways of thinking into their operation and management. There are now more diverse marketing channels, together with the convenience of online shopping services. Unique and creative thinking has gone into the design of product packaging. This exquisite design has both attracted the favor of many young customers and has seen traditional pastries move into a more refined food culture. Combining tradition and innovation has given Taiwan's pastries a new lease on life. Traditional pastries have evolved into an artistic feast on the tongue. Let the whole world discover the flavors of Taiwan.